This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
The biggest icon in podcasting.
Welcome in, everybody, to this week's edition of Doc and Jock. I am the Doc, John Macaroon. Joining me, my guy, Adam, the Jock Strozinski. Back from vacation, back from living it up with his great time with his new individual that's in his life, that's been a long-time girlfriend, and now potentially taking some good strides in the relationship. Very proud to hear great news from Adam out there in his trip to Lake Tahoe. It's great, man. I missed you. It was a grind, man. The 30 minutes I did by myself was basically me doing a therapy session, talking about how fucking scared I am flying and trying to get myself ready to drive out to Kansas City in a week or two. But you were missed. I'm glad you're back. And it's a great opportunity to complain about Michigan, complain about Jim Harbaugh, talk about the Lions getting their ass beat by the Jaguars. It was crazy in that everybody kind of thought that the Lions were going to have a great week, and they didn't. They kind of went through the motions a little bit there at training camp and against the Jaguars. But we're starting the podcast with your beef again with Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan program. Now, I'm a little bit confused as to why you'd complain, because I think Michigan took a step in the direction of saying, look, you know, we've done some things that we're not supposed to do, but that's what people are doing in college football in regards to violations, you know, in regards to certain things that happened during COVID. Now, were they violations? Yes. So they're trying to kind of rectify a situation, and I always think that when you take a proactive step. Now, the punishment is corny in that you're imposing a 3-game suspension on yourself against some of the worst opponents in your schedule. But I don't know if it was meant to kind of placate the NCAA, because they sometimes don't even care if you do that kind of stuff. And I think now the more that you read about it, the violations are real. He did some things more than just buy cheeseburgers in regards to trying to get an advantage. He got caught. He knows it. He just is trying to use legalese to explain away that he didn't lie in certain scenarios. He was trying to tell himself or convince himself that he was as forthright as possible and using the I don't recall or some certain language that you use when you're trying to evade certain questions. But in the end, Michigan self-imposed a 3-game suspension. It is weird. I didn't think it needed to happen. I would have, in my mind, could have understood it if they just wrote it out and tried to battle the NCAA. They negotiated a term of a suspension. It didn't kind of go through. And now Michigan comes out and takes a step. It does, I get it. Maybe I'm wrong. You're going to explain your point of view, but it does have a feel of like a university just trying to put up a facade of like, oh, look what we're doing here. We're taking our own steps, and look at this. We're doing our own suspension, trying to show that they're, you know, getting out in front of it. But I just look at it and say that Jim Harbaugh violated NCAA rules, and now there's going to be some consequences. And I just would have, maybe if it wasn't this way, I just would have accepted the NCAA's deal and try to just, you know, admit what you did. And I'm just curious as to why he's planting his flag in regards to his discussions. If you lied or you say, oh, you know what, I didn't understand exactly the scenarios in which my behaviors were impactful against the rules, whatever it was to make this go away, the biggest violation is Jim Harbaugh's made really a 1-week story into like a year story.
Yeah, and I think it just kind of goes to show you, one, his mindset, and two, his hubris. The guy never thinks he does anything wrong. And look, I want to start more macro and then go more micro into the football program. If you look at what's going on with the Michigan Athletic Department, if you look at basically since right around COVID, there has been a ton of missteps. This is all under Ward Manuel's watch. So I think it all kind of falls at Ward Manuel, and a lot of it has to do with not having a strong athletic director, because Michigan's athletic department has had an issue with a volleyball coach. They have had issues with Mel Parson in the hockey program, especially during COVID. They have had numerous issues with the football program, which we'll dive into. They've had a ton of other issues with other programs, Juwan Howard being one of them with the basketball program, as well as different basketball players. There's at least 3 issues that we can delve into with just the basketball program. And then when you go and you kind of get a little bit more granular and you look at what's going on with the football program, there's been a ton of things going on, not just with Jim Harbaugh, but with the football program as a whole. And this right here is, I think, a bigger issue because it's a level 1 infraction. It's now Jim Harbaugh versus the NCAA. The NCAA, he's pissed somebody off is what really has happened here, right? And look, you and I both get how the NCAA works. It's kind of turned a blind eye to this school. We'll slap a bigger school on the wrist here, and then we're gonna really take the littler school out to the woodshed, and we're gonna set an example and use them as the example. But you don't ever want to hurt your cash cows. Michigan's a cash cow. Michigan is a monster institution in the NCAA, and usually this is something that would just kind of go by the wayside. But he has pissed somebody off in the NCAA, in their front office, in their rules organization or the rules board. He's made somebody upset. And that is why, like you said, this has gone from being a one-day story to now being a year-long story, going to go into probably 2 years. And that's why this is a little bit of a bigger issue. And that's where I have a bit of an issue because the athletic department has regularly messed up underneath Ward Manuel. There are a lot of issues under Ward Manuel that have caused coaches to get fired, have caused people to sign contracts. Then all of a sudden they've been exited from the school, and now you're on the hook to pay that contract. And look, it's not my money, but it just shows that the athletic department's not running smoothly. And then when you get into Jim Harbaugh and you get into this particular situation, the narrative about it being a cheeseburger was just that. It was a narrative. It was something that was floated out there by Jim Harbaugh, by the school, and it was picked up and ran with by reporters. Okay. The real issue is this guy committed a level 1 infraction. That's a big deal. Let's start there. 2, this happened during COVID. If you go back and you remember, while COVID was going on, the NCAA was pretty strict about a lot of stuff. And then when you start to really delve into it, the big issue is Jim Harbaugh lied to the NCAA. The NCAA was just like, Jim, just tell us what happened. We'll slap you on the wrist. And honestly, the slap on the wrist might have been a 1 or 2 game suspension, but Jim Harbaugh thinks he's above it all. He thinks he's above reproach, thinks he's above the rules, thinks he's above the NCAA. And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do any of this. And he continued to lie. And then he continued to lie some more. And he continued to lie some more. And then there was this thing that came out where him and the NCAA came to an agreement on a suspension term, which was going to be 4 games, which is why I think it's comical when they self-impose a 3-game suspension. I don't know how, if what you say is true, where you come to an agreement with the NCAA on a 4-game suspension, how you double back and you impose a suspension of less time. That doesn't make sense to me. Let me tell you what I believe really happened here. I believe Jim broke the rules. I believe Jim lied to the NCAA. I think Jim thinks he's above the NCAA, thinks he's above everybody and everything. I think Jim runs basically the athletic department at this point. I think Ward Manuel is a puppet. I think what happened was the NCAA said, look, you're lying to us. You're basically derailing our investigation, and you keep setting roadblocks up. And we're not going to stand for this. Most coaches, and I'm going to give you a couple names here in a minute, what this program is starting to remind me of and who he is reminding me of. When these coaches do these things, they usually end up getting fired. These aren't things that you can come back from. But again, he runs the university. He runs the athletic department. So I don't think he's necessarily going anywhere. But I think the NCAA said, look, we want to give you 6 to 8 games. You've really messed this up. This could have been, like you said, a one-day story, but you have now stretched this out so long, and you have made this so difficult, and you have kind of put your own narrative out there, and you've tried to embarrass us, and we're just not going to take that. I think it was going to be a 6 or 8 game suspension. And what happened was Michigan was like, yeah, that's not going to really work for us. They're like, we're thinking more along the lines of maybe 2 or 3. And the NCAA was like, yeah, no, it's going to be 6 or 8. And then what happened was Michigan floated this thing out there where we're going to do a 4-game suspension. We've come to an agreement. And then the NCAA was like, wait, what? No, we haven't. We've not come to this agreement. That's why this whole thing fell apart. I use finger quotes when I say fell apart. because it didn't ever really exist. The NCAA is looking to hammer Jim Harbaugh. You look at other programs, this program is starting to remind me of. You look at OSU under Jim Tressel. You look at the Florida Gators under Urban Meyer, and there's a great documentary that's coming out on Netflix this week called Swamp Kings. I can't wait to watch it. This is what it's starting to look like. You go back and you look at those programs when they were winning and they were at their highest of highs. That was when everything started to crumble. Jim Harbaugh at this point is at his highest of highs. I don't know if he'll ever win a national championship. I don't know if he'll ever win a college football playoff game. I think him winning the Big Ten, that's his ceiling at this point. I don't know if he can break through. He hasn't shown me anything where he can get any higher than where he's at right now. So at the highest of the high, they were doing all kinds of shady backdoor deals. And look, you and I have talked about this as well. We don't necessarily mind if you're doing some of the shady stuff. It's what it is. We understand that there are McDonald bags with money that float around. NIL has kind of murked this up a little bit and made it more above board, but it has always been going on. That being said, don't get caught. Like, I don't believe that Georgia is a pristine university, and the way their football program is ran is pristine. I don't believe Alabama is pristine by any means. But you know what? Don't get caught. They keep all this underground. They basically play their role and they do their thing, and they just keep the train on the track. That's it. Jim Harbaugh has derailed this train. The NCAA wants blood. And Jim Harbaugh is now out here essentially politicking, and he is starting to resemble, and this football program is starting to resemble that of the Jim Tressel Ohio State Buckeyes, as well as the Urban Meyer-led Florida Gators, where your head coach feels he's above reproach, feels he's above all of this, and is basically letting these backdoor dealings continue to go on and turns a blind eye to it. And then when the NCAA rolls around, guess what? That head coach is gone. That head coach is out of there. That head coach, I'm having an ailment, or I'm getting sick, or this or that. Now, Jim Harbaugh is trying to push back on the NCAA, so it'll be interesting to see where this ends up in about a year. But this has gone so far to the right when really this could have been something that could have just stayed right down the middle. It could have been really simple, could have been handled. Instead, you've turned a one-day story into what's going to amount to about a 2-year story. And in the end, Jim Harbaugh's still going to get suspended. The NCAA isn't going away. They're not going to accept your 3-game suspension. They're going to look at it and they're going to be like, all right, well, here's anywhere from 3 to 5 more. And if you look at what they're doing as far as their self-imposed suspension, I mean, it's against Sisters of the Poor. Like, what does this really do? This doesn't really hurt anything. This doesn't really mess anything up. This is just it just kind of the university saying, yeah, we were a bad boy. We're going to go sit in the corner for 5 minutes. That's what this is. It's not going to satisfy the NCAA. Jim Harbaugh has spit in somebody's face, and now they want to punch him in the face, and that's what's going to happen. And like I said, his football program is starting to remind me of Jim Tressel, and is starting to remind me of Urban Meyer and the way they ran things when Urban was in Florida and the way Jim Tressel ran Ohio State. And that is a very dangerous game to play because you've seen how those things ended up. Jim Harbaugh really needs to get his ducks in a row and really needs to figure out what's going on here. And honestly, he may need to just take a little bit of a step back, may need to swallow some of his pride and just, hey, I screwed up, my bad, and just leave it at that because this is getting very, very messy.
Yeah, so are you in the opinion that, look, Michigan should have held itself to a high standard before the infractions, and now whatever it is that they're doing is just too little too late? I look at it like, look, everybody's doing it, and it didn't involve, like, excessive payment. It didn't involve, look, it's kind of one of those things where if you're not cheating, you're not trying, and I like the competitive spirit. I don't like that you got caught, but you're trying to rectify it and get back to what you got to be in terms of leaders and best. I know what you're saying. As a Michigan program, you don't want the university to be put in this spotlight to have the attention on infractions and why is it that Jeff Jackson can take cars late at night and there's no repercussions, and why is it that the basketball coach is swinging on folks and he's still there and all that kind of stuff. I understand where you're saying that, look, Michigan should have and should not be in the conversation to be an institution that doesn't have control. I look at it like yes, you're being idealistic in regards to like, yes, they should be doing all this. But in the landscape of how college football works, I just think they're operating like everybody else, and they were never different. They were never in the conversation of being an elite, upstanding program. I never put them as that, but I never would have because I'm a Spartan supporter. But I look at it from afar and I say that, look, he did what he had to do to win, and in the pursuit of winning, you do things, and in the end, level 1 infraction, he should have just let the NCAA slap him on the wrist. You're right. I just think that it is trying to just, put lipstick on a pig and just trying to say, hey, look what we did. And it ends up besmirching the reputation of Michigan. It's not a good look, but because in the end, here's where Jim Harbaugh wins. Winning cures all. You got fans that at this point, getting to the playoffs lets Jim Harbaugh basically do whatever he needs to do. You know what I mean? I don't think the fan base even cares. I think you're in the very large minority in regards to those that are upset. I think people don't even care. As long as he gets the team to the playoffs and doesn't embarrass the program when he gets there, I don't think people even care.
I'll admit, I am in the minority. I'm one of the few that do care, that does care what that reputation is. And the reason for that is because those fans who don't care, those fans, the large vocal minority or majority, those fans are the fans that I generally want to punch in the face. Those are the fans I don't like. You can't have it both ways. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't go around saying we're the leaders and the best, and you go around and you do everything else that everybody else does. Like you can't do that. You can't have it both ways. And that's where I have a huge problem.
Okay, so I look at it and I say this then. What's next then? What's the next step for Michigan to right the ship and get back to where they need to be?
I think
just clean up.
You need to get through this, right? You need to get this out of the way. And I think what they're doing right now is they're just kind of delaying the inevitable. You're just kicking the can down the road. Jim Harbaugh really messed this up in the beginning, right? It's not like you can rewind time. What Jim Harbaugh needed to do is just say, yeah, I screwed up. Take the 2 or 3 game penalty that they were going to give him. Instead, it turned into 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games. And now this is going to be a long-term thing that the university is trying to I think, as one report had it, curry favor with the NCAA. They're trying to get on their good side, saying, hey, look, no. We did 3 games already. We did 3 games. So if you want to suspend us 8, that we've already done 3. Just give us 5. Just give us 5 next year. If Jim Harbaugh would have just been honest about it, it might have been a 1 or 2 game suspension. We could have moved on, and we would have never have talked about this. It would have been taken care of in May or June, and we would have been fine. Instead, it's now August. The season's around the corner, and we're talking about it. So in order to move past this and to get where you want to go, you need to accept the punishment, and you need to just take it, and you need to kind of go from there. And look, we both understand these types of things go on at this level. We get it. Just don't get caught again.
Yes.
Don't get caught. Like you can't get caught again doing these types of things. And that's what it is. That's what it boils down to.
And they should have high standards. They should. And I think they'll learn from it. And if the rumors are true that maybe just Harbaugh wants to find any avenue to the NFL, then maybe this will be the final year of Jim Harbaugh, and he won't care what the infractions are. He'll just be like all the other college coaches that did their thing, acted above reproach, and then went on to the NFL and hopefully left Michigan a little bit better than when they got there. So we'll see how it plays out, but you're right. The infractions keep escalating, and what's going to happen next? This may be it. I think that Jim Harbaugh probably walked up to the infraction line and looked at it and said, "Okay, I don't want to play in these kind of waters." And I just think that that's where Michigan's at. Whereas Georgia, they don't care. They're like, what? This violation? What a puss. Look what we're doing. And they're just waiting like, look, shit. Kirby Smart's going to be like, damn, they don't know what the hell I've done. I've got a couple more years of riding this wave of success, and then I'm out of here. So we'll see. We'll see how this plays out and how Michigan continues to handle the infraction and how they maneuver through the NCAA. It's really interesting, the battle, the NCAA versus Michigan, and I'm curious in 6 months from now where this all shakes out. And stay tuned. In a couple weeks, we'll talk about it. The Big Ten is realigned. I'm curious what Adam thinks about how the Big Ten now has some teams in the West. and how that's going to shake out as we preview college football on the next episode. So it'll be very interesting to see the ever-changing landscape of the Big Ten. Now, let's shift gears, talk about the NFL. As you were gone, living the high life, enjoying your vacation, the Lions, I thought, had decent practices against the Jaguars, but it did have a feel that they kind of weren't as crisp as maybe they were in the first week, where it's kind of like the dog days of training camp. Fighting up against the Jaguars is because the Jaguars basically sent like the staff and like one reporter. That was it. There was no, like, as opposed to the Giants who sent half the media in the world to Allen Park, the Jaguars was like one radio dude who just kind of bullshitted his way through situations and was telling things that kind of didn't make any sense. I look at the practices. They were decent, but they weren't as like crisp and as solid as they needed to be, and it kind of carried over. I just thought that based on the talent alone, that the second stringers would fight a little bit harder. But boy, what I learned is that they came out flat, and in life and in football, if you come out flat and the Jaguars had that extra motivation because the Lions kicked their ass in the regular season, then that can happen. It was just a shitty game start to really, it was crazy because people can accept the loss. They can accept a preseason performance that isn't that great, but what they can't accept is kind of the lackadaisical, ho-hum, kind of like, we got to be here approach. Kind of acting like the media, like, oh, fuck, it's a Saturday. We don't want to be here. Can we just get a story out and get home as fast as possible? Some of us got parties to go to, so we got shit to do. But the team played like that, and what really caught people's eye was the piss-poor play of the offensive line and Teddy Bridgewater not living up to kind of the hype of being the best backup. But he's still raw and new in terms of this system. And he said Ben Johnson has all this verbiage that is completely new that he's got to catch up on. And he did have a scrimmage that, again, wasn't that great at Allen Park on Tuesday. So I look at it like it's Teddy Bridgewater's no Superman. He's not going to just come in here and run the offense and compete for Jared Goff's job. But what he needs to do is kind of catch up to speed so he can look like a backup. And I think what the biggest thing that people's takeaway is Sudfeld's not good enough to be here. I don't think he's going to be here. Dan Campbell basically all but said it Tuesday that, look, we proposed the third quarterback rule, but there's no, look, the Lions have operated like the Lions. You play well, you stay. You don't play well, you're gone. And I just think that it was a totally different performance than what we saw. But we did learn a lot in regards to those that are battling for jobs. And you recognize that, a couple pieces on the offensive line that aren't playing well jack up the operation. And that's what happens in a given play. If one dude misses an assignment, you can make it where you can't get the handoff to the running back. That's how bad it can be if one guy misses his play and has one miscommunication. So that's how the intricate nature of the NFL is. I thought it was a dud of a game. It was actually easier to write a game like that, to cover it, because you have all you need, and there was no semblance of an opportunity the Lions were going to win it. So it made it easier for me to get back to personal stuff. But the bright spots, I just thought that you look at battles that are emerging that are kind of coming into place a little bit more in regards to linebacker and the third running back and cornerback and things like that. You're starting to get better answers in regards to who's going to take those spots. And I just, me personally, I just thought that it was like a let's get out of here type of a game. And it's the preseason, and we'll talk about the value of it. I think the biggest thing that is the factor that you got to look at is every team looks for depth constantly. And just because, yes, the Lions' offensive line is not as good as it was last year in regards to the reserves, doesn't mean it's a final conclusion. I just get upset when people go to the, I think, lazy narrative of saying, well, every team struggles at the offensive line position and in depth. Guys, who cares what the Seahawks backup reserve offensive linemen are doing? You should only care about what Brad Holmes decides for the Lions. And if every team wants to run like ass, then you don't go, well, let's just do that too. You have to kind of start to act like an NFL team that's a winner, which means, hey, if there's a weakness, Brad Holmes is going to address it. He's given you no indication that he's going to stick with the guys that can't play for far too long. He knows the guy that blew the assignment. So, and if he keeps doing it, he's not going to be here. You'll see the article and you'll see the report that the guy got cut. So stop with the laziness and saying, well, every team struggles. No, Brad Holmes' job is to be above the fray. And that's why taking gambles on running backs and linebackers puts him in a ballsy position because if it works, he ain't acting like everybody else. He's acting different. So I think they'll address those issues. They went out, they traded for Denzel Mims. The man is doing what he's trying to do to make the team better. But I just think that you can't live in sports denial for your whole life and just be like, well, everybody has that problem, so it's not a problem. No, the offensive line needs to be upgraded a little bit in the reserve spot. And I do believe that that probably will be a spot that they add when other teams start cutting players. So don't come to the podcast and bring that shit to the table because it's just going to get slammed down to the ground because I don't care what the Bears secondary is doing in the reserve spot at the moment. When they play the Bears, I'll start looking at it. But right now I care about how the Lions are constructed, and how the Lions are constructed ain't so bad, but you can start, and that's what the preseason's for, is to highlight, okay, you crew are the secondary crew. Here's your final exam. What do? Some people are going to pass the test. Others are going to fall flat on their face, and they're going to get cut. That's what you put these guys out there to do, and we got some answers.
See, look, this is what I took out of it. I think the offense is not as deep as the defense. I think last year, in the last 2 years,
correct,
the defense has been a big issue. And I think the defense was a point of emphasis for this front office, for this team. And I think they've built the depth on the defense. That being said, offensively, you're looking thin with impact players on that offensive line, which is a bit of a concern because that is a position or a position group that generally deals with an injury or two, especially when you've got guys like Frank Ragnow and Taylor Decker dealing with issues that always seem to reoccur, whether it's a turf toe or whether it's just a foot issue or it's a hand issue. They're always dealing with something. So you always have to try to find an extra guy to roll in there. You almost need 6 offensive linemen. And then when you look at the wide receivers, it's really Amon-Ra St. Brown and Khalif Raymond. And after that, pencil in whoever you want. Pencil in whatever you're looking to do. You don't really have anything after that. You don't have anything that you're really counting on. Marvin Jones, he'll be a guy, but like, what do you want out of Marvin Jones at this point in his career? You know, he's not going to be a monster difference maker. He's the guy who's been brought in to kind of take some of the load off of the previous 2 guys that I mentioned. He's the guy who's been brought in because he's a good locker room guy, and hopefully he can help J-Mo out. J-Mo's nowhere to be found because he did stupid stuff, and he's now going to be suspended for 6 games. On top of that, he's now dealing with a hamstring injury. So, like, he's unavailable. Like, zero availability from this man whatsoever. And then when you start working your way through the roster, it's just not deep enough. There's just not enough guys that make impacts. I think, Chase Cota? I think Chase Cota is going to basically be the new Tom Kennedy. He's going to be the guy that all the fans love. He's going to be the unforming guy who you're like, okay, well, if we can put him in, maybe we can get some production out of him. He looks like he could be a huge difference maker. He might be our next Wes Welker. We can just kind of, purpose him right. And that's what the fans are going to want. But, like, is he really a guy who's going to make a big difference on this team? At this point, I say no. I don't know what you have as far as wide receivers. So I think defensively, you are much stronger than you were last year. You are in a much better place defensively. But I think on the offensive side of it, you're thin in spots that you as a team count on. You count on that offensive line. What gives Jared Goff the ability to go out there and play like a top 5 or a top 10 quarterback. That offensive line gives him the confidence to stay in the pocket and throw that ball downfield. And speaking of throwing the ball downfield, you've got 2 guys catch it. And let's be honest, neither one of those guys are take the top off the defense kind of guys. There are guys who can get separation, yes, but there are guys who do a lot of their work underneath and in those middle passing routes in the passing tree. So like you're not going to get those huge chunk plays that you're trying to scheme and trying to build. At this point, this offense is very much run heavy and short passes into the flat and some of those middle tier passes. You've got nobody who's really taken the top off and is looking to be that difference maker right now because J-Mo's on the sideline and everybody else is basically a guy. And look, I think they might get a guy or 2 that they can sign and add to the practice squad, but let's be honest. Everybody else is kind of just a guy. And that's why when I bring up the bright spot, that is Chase Cota. I thought he had a pretty nice game, right?
Yeah,
I don't think he amounts to much besides being, like I said, the next Tom Kennedy.
It's interesting because at the practice Tuesday, it did look like the Lions were without their swagger offensively, without Amon-Ra St. Brown. And it's interesting. One player can be the lifeblood of a whole unit, and that's what Amon-Ra brings to the offense. Is that injury that he had kind of took the life out of, and the injury to JMO kind of took the life out of the week, and it kind of makes sense.
But look, that right there, I think is a perfect example of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Have a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown in JMO. If something happens to Amon-Ra St. Brown early in the season, somewhere in those first 6 games, this offense is going to look mighty different, and it's going to have trouble doing what they're trying to do. You've got basically one guy out there who is eligible and available for you every single game. If he gets hurt, that's a problem. JMO is 6 weeks away, and we don't even know what he really is. We don't know what he actually is, and that's a problem. And that's a problem because he put himself in this spot and because this team drafted him when he was hurt last year. So it's twofold why they're kind of in this predicament right now, and it sucks.
Yeah, it did. And I think we get the answer with Nate Sudfeld. I just think that it's time to move on. I think you go into the season with Bridgewater and Goff, and Adrian Martinez hopefully clears waivers, and he gets the opportunity to stay on the practice squad. Look, Nate Sudfeld, 2 years into the system, just hasn't, I wouldn't say looks like he's completely lost or doesn't know what he's doing. I would say he hasn't taken the step up where you would think that a guy that's been in the system, been there the whole year, should have a better understanding. And it's unfortunate that, he is playing with reserve backup offensive linemen, but still his decision-making not the best, and the communication still doesn't look like it's on point with the receivers that he needs to on a consistent basis. So I would move on from Sudfeld. I think that clearly has established itself. And I think the other bright spot you realize is the defense has depth on the defensive line as well. That's just crazy, where you look at James Houston, third down specialist. You get Julian Aquara now on the third team for the most part. And you got guys that are just balling out at a high level on the defensive line on a regular basis, and they're making plays and getting hits. John Kaminsky's playing at a high level, and I think he's probably going to be a starter or at least get a lot of reps along the defensive line. So you're getting a lot of quality answers to some key questions, and I think that you're starting to see, too, that, you know what? Stephen Gilmore might be a cornerback that could be somebody that, if he clears, I don't know, another guy that's going to be tough, because if you don't roster him, I think another team, probably the team where his brother plays, might pick him up, because his brother's probably like, damn, look at him making plays. He rebounded from a tough play where he gave up a bomb, but then the next play he's aware and catches the stray from Tracy Walker as he deflects the ball right to him. So there's some resiliency there, and I think he's a good player. I just hope that he does, if he doesn't make the team, I hope he does clear and has the opportunity to stay with Detroit and develop, because I think he's a really good player. So you look at it and you say, okay, Nate Sudfeld, it's pretty clear. I mean, he might be given one more chance against the Panthers this week, but I don't see the Panthers just being, yeah, sure, come carve us up in our home stadium. I don't think so. I realize that when you look at the Detroit Lions, there are a couple holes. It's obvious in regards to, like you said, wide receiver. They'll get lucky, and Corey Davis does eventually get cut, like people are saying. Maybe you have an opportunity to see if Chase Cota actually makes the team and will develop and start his career shining. But I just think that Nate Sudfeld, pretty straightforward. You're going to move on, and I think that it places the more pressure on Teddy Bridgewater to step up. What did you think of Teddy Bridgewater coming to the team? It was basically not a secret. I mean, everybody knew when it was going down. What do you think? Do you think he'll catch up, and do you think that he'll be able to at least be the guy in the room that is able to kind of keep the Lions afloat? Because right now, the NFL world really likes the Lions, putting them in a lot of top 10s in power rankings heading into the start of the season.
Look, I think Bridgewater is the best backup quarterback you can have. I think he's a definite upgrade over Nate Sudfeld. To be completely honest with you, I don't understand why Nate Sudfeld is still here taking snaps. I don't know why he is currently on this team. I thought after last week's game, or I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago's game, I would have cut him and I would have moved Adrian Martinez up. Adrian Martinez would have been my third quarterback. So I'm not sure why Nate Sudfeld is still here. I've seen nothing from him in the 2 years he has been here. So it makes me really scratch my head. But no, I think the addition of Teddy Bridgewater helps to settle down that quarterback room, really helps to solidify what they're trying to do. I think Teddy Bridgewater will catch up. I think it's just a little bit of a learning curve. You've got to remember, he came in, late? Was it last week, maybe 2 weeks ago? I'm basically a week off. So he came in basically late 2 weeks ago.
Yep. And
there was no way he was going to be able to digest what they wanted him to do and be out there for that first preseason game. So he gets in the second preseason game, and look, honestly, he probably had 10 days with the playbook. And again, the verbiage is completely different, but you know what his talent level is. You know what his skill set is. You know what he has the ability to do. And watching the game, the offensive line was horrible. They looked like a bunch of turnstiles. Like, he would get the ball and he would essentially have 2 or 3 seconds where he was trying to make a decision and trying to get out of a way of being tackled. Nothing could ever really develop downfield. The plays couldn't really take place and be created the way they were supposed to. And what I seen in those situations of just utter chaos was a guy who makes good decisions, was a guy who doesn't necessarily panic, was a guy who doesn't really flinch. This is a guy who has a couple of linebackers crashing down on him, and he secures the ball, steps up in the pocket, slips around those guys, has another linebacker crashing down on him and is in his hip pocket, and is able to get a little bit of separation and is able to make a pass downfield. Now, if the wide receiver could have caught it, we'd be talking about something completely different. It'd be a great play, but the wide receiver dropped it. But your quarterback was able to basically ad-lib and keep the play alive long enough to get that ball downfield while your offensive linemen were basically standing around pointing at each other, looking like the Spider-Man meme, like, you were supposed to get him. No, you were supposed to get him. I was supposed to get him. Yeah, you were. No, I wasn't. You were. And that's what it looked like when I was watching this football game unfold. So I think Teddy Bridgewater makes this team better. I think it will be a bit of a process for him to get where he needs to be. I think him coming into camp late really hurts, but I think by the time week 2 rolls around, he'll be okay. He'll be much more comfortable. And the hope is Teddy Bridgewater doesn't see the field. And if he does see the field, it's in garbage time. And that's really what we're hoping for here. Yep. But to go back to Nate Sudfeld, not really sure why he's here. I think you cut Nate Sudfeld, and if you want, you can move him to your practice squad if that's what you feel you need to do. I think the Lions need to figure out if they're going to keep 2 or 3 quarterbacks, right? Because it sounds like at some point Hendon Hooker might get activated, right? So if you're going to roll 3 quarterbacks for the season, you're going to have Jared Goff, you're going to have Teddy Bridgewater, and I think you keep Adrian Martinez. And then when Hendon Hooker is available to be activated, or when you feel confident he can be activated, I think then what you do is you try to sneak Adrian Martinez through waivers and get him onto your practice squad, and then you probably let Nate Sudfeld go. So if I was wearing that Brad Holmes cap and I was the general manager, that's probably how I would try to do it. But Nate Sudfeld has really showed me absolutely nothing, man. Absolutely nothing. And it's frustrating to watch because remember when he came in and we were watching what was it? The HBO.
Yeah, Hard Knocks.
No, the HBO. Yeah, Hard Knocks. We were watching Hard Knocks. And there was an episode where he was brought in. And you had to watch Tim Boyle and you had to watch David Blau both get cut. And Nate Sudfeld was supposed to be the savior, man. He was supposed to be the guy who was like, all right, well, our backup quarterback situation is much better. I don't know if it was really all that much better. We're going into year 2 here with Nate Sudfeld, and I don't feel relieved that whenever he's on the field.
Yeah.
Now Teddy Bridgewater being here, I feel much more relieved. I feel like our quarterback situation is much, much better.
Yeah, the ceiling has been met by Sudfeld, and that's the case. And the Lions deserve better, and I think that'll be the case. I think he'll probably play against the Panthers, and then he'll be cut over the weekend. So stay tuned to All Lions and the podcast at Detroit Podcast, and to the trackers, to the cut down day, and we'll have all that information for you as the rumors start, and it'll be a fun time. The Lions made it tough for reporters. One day the deadline. So it'll be probably over the weekend, probably starting right after the game. They'll start making the cuts, and we'll see, how it all shakes out. But the Lions have to be down to 53 by 4 o'clock on Tuesday. And so it'll be a while. You'll know the Lions roster by Tuesday. It's going to be crazy to see. And it'll be in flux, and it'll change even by the first practice, but we'll see the initial version of the roster coming up very, very soon by the time we record the next podcast. All right, one last topic here. What'd you make of ESPN putting the Lions number 10? And it was real interesting. It was a simple article by ESPN, one of the ones where they just kind of go around the league and ask the reporters a question. They put the Lions ranked 10th, up from number 13 after the draft, indicating in the question going along with the power poll was, who's the guy on the hot seat? And the great reporter Eric Woodyard from ESPN, he said it was Jared Goff. Now, I understand the case that the pressure is going to be on the signal caller there, but I think that he's been put in the position to kind of succeed with a great offensive line, 2 good running backs, a tight end. I just think that he's going to just have to need to man the ship. And I think who's going to be on the hot seat probably is not going to be Jared Goff, because I think he's going to be able to kind of maneuver through this offense. I think the guy on the hot seat is Jameson Williams. I mean, you basically are the janky transmission on a Ferrari that's not getting into 5th gear. And that's really, it's a big cog. It's a big deal. It's like you got a car that can go 0 to 90 in 4 seconds, but every time you get into 40 miles an hour, it starts to shake a little bit because the gears grind. And you realize JMO, I think, is the key. A healthy, productive Jameson Williams unlocks a lot of things. The deep threat, the scare that he could put into defenses. I think the guy on the hot seat's none other than Jameson Williams. It's not Jared Goff, because I just don't think that they're going to try to throw it all that deep. They're going to give him a lot of the safe shit. And Laporta, I mean, he's got 5 options without JMO. Laporta, Gibbs, Montgomery, St. Brown, and that's 4 options right there. And then the 5th will be any of the combination of Reynolds, Khalif, and Marvin Jones. So I disagree with Eric there in regards to with Goff being on the hot seat. And I think the Lions at number 10 is a perfect spot to start the year.
Yeah, I like them being ranked at number 10 as well. Look, not too high, not too low. I do believe this is a team that is in the upper third of the league. I believe this is a team that is going to be in the playoffs and will have a home playoff game. So I think 10 is a perfect spot for them to fall. What I had the issue with was Jared Goff. Jared Goff is a guy who, over the course of the last year and a half, has played exceptional football, has been a guy who has placed in the top 5 of all quarterbacks around the NFL. Like, he is a guy who is in that upper tier with quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes, with quarterbacks like Joe Burrow, with quarterbacks. He's better than Josh Allen. Like if you look at his stats, like what he does with the ball, he's better than Josh Allen. So this is a guy who has done all of that. I don't think he's on the hot seat at all. I think this season, you need Jared Goff to perform like he's performed for the last, 24 games. You need him to go out there and do what he's been doing. But that, I don't believe he's on the hot seat. I think you're more accurate with what you said, where the hot seat really falls on Jameson Williams. We have no idea what this guy is. This is a guy that you gave up a bunch of draft capital for. This is a guy that you moved up and you were like, he's going to be a difference maker on this offense. This is a guy who has not done anything. He's touched the ball twice in his career. This is a guy who, again, will be missing a large part of the season. You realize he's going to miss a third of the NFL season. That's a lot of time. Last year, he missed over 2/3 of the NFL season. By the time it's all said and done, he'll be 2 years into his career, and he will not have played 1 full year of football. He hasn't had really any meaningful touches in a game. This is a guy who is supposed to really help unlock this offense and really help. If you look at the timeline, because that's how teams are constructed. They're constructed on a timeline. If you look at the timeline of this team, Jameson Williams is really delaying and retarding where they want to go. You know, Jared Goff is on this contract, and it's very friendly for this team right now. And this team is going to have to make a decision on what to do with Jared Goff in the very near future. You were trying to get a feel on what that would look like, especially with Jameson Williams. Being this guy who can unlock that deep pass, being the guy who can get that separation and get downfield. Is Jared Goff's arm strong enough to get the ball to him? Because if it's not, the way this offense is constructed, we might have to look in a different direction. We might have to try to reevaluate what we're trying to do here. And again, you will be through 2 full years of his career, and he will not have played 1 full year yet. And again, he'll be picking up in the middle of the season, and Jared Goff has proven time in and time out that he is a guy who requires working with you. He is a guy who requires being of the same mindset with you. He is a guy who needs that familiarity with you to be productive and to really be able to do what he's looking to do. And when you're on the sideline because you're injured, or when you're on the sideline because you're suspended because of a gambling situation, when you're a guy who comes back in preseason games and he's going through some of the preseason routine, and you're just not on the same page, and then you got to hang out after, and the next thing you know, you're hurt again, it doesn't bode well for where this team is looking to go. It really doesn't, especially when you look at what is playing in your division and is against one of your biggest rivals in Green Bay, and the guy that if you would have just stayed where you were at, not traded up for, had a really good year the second half of last year. And if you look at, he would probably fit in perfectly here. He seems to be of the same mindset of a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is the ultimate football player. He is the guy that you want every player on your team to have that focus. Seems like he's a guy more in line with that. Not really the razzle-dazzle, not really the flash. I'm here to work. I'm here to earn that paycheck, and I'm here to take the ball to the house. And you could have had that, and you wouldn't have had to give up anything. Instead, you made moves. You gave a bunch of draft capital. And for your return on your investment, that's what we're talking about here. Return on investment, ROI. We're not getting anything. Yeah. You haven't gotten anything. You had one really spectacular play, and it didn't really mean anything. It wasn't like it helped win you that game. It was just a play.
Yeah, could you imagine? Yeah.
I think J-Mo's the dude on the hot seat.
Yeah, and the game's going to be played. You could have just stayed where you were, and you could have had Watson and Kenneth Walker.
Yep,
and
exactly.
That looks kind of juicy. So it's not determinable yet. You know, maybe J-Mo comes back and actually in the time that he's healing, wherever he's allowed to get his hamstring rubbed, it maybe not be with the Lions, but wherever he's allowed to get his rehab, hopefully the NFL changes that rule where suspended players that are hurt can't get treatment at the facility. I think that's a crazy rule, especially for your players. So hopefully he comes back, he takes it seriously, because he could be a serious threat in the postseason when you need that one play. Maybe it'll be J-Mo that makes it, because if not, and if late in the year you got to play the Packers and it's Watson making plays on you, people are going to bring it up, and it'll be talked about by Doc and Jock and by everybody else. But right now, J-Mo's still in the wait-and-see approach, but definitely his seat is getting very, very warm. You know whose seat's not warm? Doc and Jock, baby. We're going on, and we're about to celebrate our 10th anniversary podcasting. It's going to be a fun time over the summer. It's crazy, man, as we approach 10 years. We started in about September of 2013 recording on a regular basis, and here we are 10 years later recording into the episodes of 500s. It's crazy. So thank you guys for your support. It's great. Only bigger and better things coming. Make sure you follow Adam on Twitter at AdamRSJRZ. Follow the network at Detroit Podcast. Big season ahead for the Lions. Good stuff happening with the Tigers, Red Wings, and Pistons in their development, and let's see if they take the next step in the coming 12 months. For the Jock, Adam Strozinski, I am the Doc, John Macaroon. Podcasting time is coming to a close. Let's hit everybody up next week when we fire the microphones up, turn the lights on for the latest edition of Doc and Jock.